to the second session of our 2022 Community Conversation Series. The objectives of these conversations is to provide a forum to raise awareness and increase engagement on important topics in our community. A series like this comes together with a great deal of help, and we have many organizations to thank. First, I'd like to thank Rockwell Automation for sponsoring and making this series possible. I would also like to thank the Center for Community Solutions for tonight's discussion's co-sponsorship. And thank you to them for their partnership throughout the entire series. And to thank IdeaStream Public Media for being our lead media partner. And thank you to our many community partners for their support throughout this series. Tonight's topic, the effect of limiting critical race theory, is an important one. Legislators have introduced bills aiming at the teaching of critical race theory. Aimed at barring the teaching of critical race theory. How will this affect our communities? We have a great panel here this evening to discuss the potential implications of these bills written with their own organizations and communities they serve, and the intended impact of these bills in the education and nonprofit sectors. We're privileged to have with us this evening Rick Jackson as our moderator. Rick is a senior host and producer for WKSU, NPR, and WVIZ PBS. He's an award-winning journalist with over 40 years experience as an anchor and reporter for network and local television news, public television, and commercial and public radio news. Rick currently hosts The Sound of Ideas on IdeaStream Public Media. So without further ado, I welcome you again this evening, and I'm honored to introduce tonight's conversation moderator, Rick Jackson. Thank you. Rick?
Augie, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you, United Way of Greater Cleveland, for inviting me to moderate this critical discussion. And thank you to the City Club of Cleveland for hosting this series of events. WOVU for simulcasting this evening's discussion live on 95.9 FM. WEWS Channel 5 for live streaming on news5cleveland.com. WKYC Channel 3 for live streaming on WKYC.com. And WOIO Channel 19 for live streaming on cleveland19.com. Now, so that everybody understands how this is going to work this evening, how we will interact as a community, I will begin discussion with questions I've prepared for this conversation. There will be, though, public question and answer segments beginning at approximately 6:45. Questions from the community will be heard and shared with our panel. And you can start asking those as soon as right now. Anytime during this evening's program, we'll make every attempt to get all the questions answered. Now, here's the way to get those questions in. Text them to 216-307-5632. That's going to be on your screen, 216-307-5632. At this time, I'd also like to introduce our panel of experts. Tonight, we are joined by some great folks here. John Corlett serves as the President, Executive Director of the Center for Community Solutions. His career has included leadership roles in both the public and private sectors, including serving as Vice President for Government Relations and Community Affairs at the Metro Health System and as the State of Ohio's Medicaid Director. Also with us, Blaine Griffin, the Ward 6 Councilman from the City of Cleveland, President of the City of Cleveland Council. President Blaine Griffin represents one of the city's most diverse wards. It encompasses the east side neighborhoods of Fairfax, Larchmere, Little Italy, Woodland Hills, and parts of Buckeye Shaker, University Circle, North Broadway, Slavic Village, and Union Miles. Busy man. Aisha Hardaway is here as well. Aisha Hardaway is an associate professor of law at Case Western Reserve University School of Law. As a member of the faculty there, Hardaway teaches as a clinician in the Milton A. Kramer Law Clinic. Professor Hardaway is also the director of Case Western Reserve University's School of Law Social Justice Law Center and the co-director of the university's Social Justice Institute. And also with us, Merle Johnson. Merle's a retired teacher with 40 years of teaching experience in the Cleveland Public Schools. Congratulations on that. Graduate of Glenville High School in the Cleveland District, she received her Bachelor of Arts degree from Kent State University, her Master of Education degree from Cleveland State University. She was elected to the State Board of Education in November of 2016. And tonight, Alicia Ellis will present the community questions, your questions. Ms. Ellis is the founder and creator of the multimedia platform Mas Luray. She's also the co-founder of the women's empowerment group, Fierce Women on Board. So welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to lend your expertise and this perspective to tonight's dialogue, which should be a great conversation. Now to begin, the battle over critical race theory in Ohio schools will not be solved here tonight, that we can promise you. But we do hope to educate and enlighten, besides providing a forum for a better understanding of where the fight is and where the fight is going. As you may be aware, the Ohio State and Local Government Committee held a brief hearing on HB 327 last month, where a new substitute bill was introduced. This represents another change in the bill, and as some in the trenches who wish to maintain the current options have noted, each revision of the bill, in their eyes, has made it worse. So let's begin. Aisha Hardaway, we've established that it's been nearly a full year now since Republican lawmakers initially introduced the bill that would ban the teaching of so-called critical race theory in Ohio's K-12 classrooms, what we were long calling House Bill 327, pending additional future adjustments, is also what you, Aisha, have called irresponsible legislation. Expound for the audience what many find to be irresponsible about the lawmakers' plans. She is not yet with us. Okay, we will step forward and go back. And I should also mention at this point that we had invited Representatives Diane Grindell of Chesterland and Sarah Fowler Arthur of Ashtabula to join with us in this conversation, speak on the bill that they have co-sponsored, and to take your questions, audience questions. Neither is here. Let's move on to inside the schools, where there is concern on many fronts. The lines which have been drawn have created some unlikely companionships, such as when the Columbus City Schools, for instance, and the district's unions issued a joint statement in opposition to these proposals. Merle Johnson, talk to me from a teacher's perspective. What do you fear losing the most should efforts like House Bill 327 become Ohio law?
Well, first of all, well, thank you for inviting me to be here. And I need to mention I was reelected in 2020. You mentioned I was elected in 2016, but I was reelected in 2020. You know, the main thing that we fear losing is truth in the classroom. The feeling of trust that students have when they walk into the classroom, that they're going to be told the truth about America's history. Now, America's history has been whitewashed for years, and what this bill does is it makes it worse. I was thinking about this today. It's very sad that teaching has suddenly become a dangerous occupation. I say that because in the bill, it threatens teachers with the loss of their license if they tell the truth, if they talk about race or sexism in the classroom, if they talk about the civil rights movement they have to talk about it as an objective a subject, which is ridiculous. You can't talk about the American Civil Rights Movement objectively. But that's the biggest fear, is that you will no longer have an honest education for our students, which will make it impossible for them to go out and be critical thinkers, because they will not be being told the truth.
Thank you. There are students' educations at stake, college scholarships at stake. We'll address that a little bit later. But as we continue the overview here, John Corlett, you've expressed a fear that these laws, as they're proposed right now, will reach far beyond the schools, even have an impact on public health.
Yeah, Rick, and thanks for having me here tonight to be a part of this conversation. So yeah, the bill actually has a really broad reach, and it actually sort of, I would say, targets diversity, equity, and inclusion activities by our state government, local governments, nonprofit organizations, for-profit corporations, anybody who has some connection with state or local government for this sort of special oversight. The law would require us to certify that not a single employee or volunteer is talking about what they call divisive concepts. And these divisive concepts are so fuzzy and so unclear that it might not be clear what you're allowed to talk about, if you're allowed to talk about anything at all. And like Merle Johnson referenced, there's penalties in there for these organizations. If you do the wrong thing, if one of your volunteers or one of your staff members happens to talk about what is then called a divisive concept, you can lose all your public funding. And that is a really, I think, a pretty severe penalty in this case.
Thank you. Blaine Griffin, Chairman of the City Council Health and Human Services Committee, you led the charge years ago to declare racism a public health crisis, which, by the way, the Ohio General Assembly has yet to do. Please follow what John was saying about the potential for impact on nonprofit organizations, particularly in the health field. What's the potential impact on City Hall, and particularly involving policing?
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you all for allowing me to be here today. And I agree with what Merle Johnson said, is that, where did critical thinking go? I thought that's what education was for. It's not just for A's, B's, and C's, it's for critical thinking. And, definitely, like you said, the draconian penalties that are associated with this, where you talk about 25% of your state funding that you will lose on the first offense, and the second offense, 50% of your state funding, and 100% of your state funding upon a third offense. It's egregious. It's one of the most ridiculous things that I've ever seen. And to already places that are already struggling in order to try to accomplish equity and inclusion and all of the things that we're trying to do in our communities, to put this cloud and shroud of doubt over just being honest and having honest dialogue is really ridiculous. And, I tell people oftentimes that, the reason why it's important to have these conversations around race is because I'm a big fan of movies, and I tell people often the biggest trick, the biggest trick that the devil ever played on mankind is to convince them that he didn't exist. And that's why you have to shine a light on these issues like racism and other things. But to actually have these kind of draconian penalties is really sad. And that quote comes from The Usual Suspects, by the way. And that's what we got here, the usual suspects that are basically just trying to put out a divisive concept to really try to put a red herring out there to mislead the public, to try to continue to keep us polarized. There's always total order amongst chaos and confusion, Rick.
President, let me chase you with that one. Back in August of 2021, a Brookings EDU article stated, Fox News has mentioned critical race theory 1,300 times in less than 4 months. Common thought was because the clause critical race theory has become the top catchphrase for people who are unwilling to acknowledge America's racist past history and how it impacts the present, many of whom rely on Fox as their primary source of news. So given that many people's fears are so fueled, Blaine, do you feel like this Ohio House bill is about a whole lot more than CRT?
It's a whole lot more than CRT. Let me just read this briefly for you. And
Sure.
This is from Sarah Fowler Arthur, the state representative that gave testimony, that wrote in Congress in July 4th, 1776, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. It's funny that I got to sit here and listen that this lady would actually sit there and try to justify this kind of behavior when we're talking about slave owners who actually put this together. And that's the kind of conversation that you have to have in educational settings in order to make sure that people understand that, why it's important to talk about race and why it's important to talk about these things. But once again, this is a red herring that's put out there by a conservative wing. I won't even say the Republican Party, but a conservative wing that tries to continue to put polarizing issues out, politically polarizing issues out, in order to try to gin up their base. It's straight out of the book of one of our ex-presidents, and that's the reason why he's an ex-president and not a current president.
Thank you for that. I should point out to the audience that Representative Fowler, who he was just talking about there, did a lengthy interview with one of our streaming partners, Channel 5. You want to go to their website and see some of the things that she had to say. What she said engendered an entire series of stories there as other people commented back to things she said about, for instance, the Holocaust. So that's there for you to find on your own after this. Monday, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, just a couple of days ago, signed the Parental Rights in Education bill. They've nicknamed it the Don't Say Gay bill. No one is saying that specifically follows to Ohio, but John Corlett, is there a concern that opening up the Ohio legislature to whatever someone feels is against their particular inclination, as in CRT language, leads to further restrictions of rights, further restrictions of privileges?
Oh yeah, Rick. I mean, I think the problem, I mean, there's a lot of problems with this bill, but this whole notion of what are these called these divisive concepts, the things that are sort of now forbidden that we can't talk about. I mean, a local businessman told me who runs a program, trying to involve disadvantaged youth in looking at business careers, said, we're not sure we could do that anymore. I mean, and a librarian told me that they were worried about what books could they purchase. I mean, we have like the best libraries in the country. We have the #1 library here in Cuyahoga County. Cleveland Public Library is an amazing library. Why would we put all that at risk over these sort of, because I agree with Council President Griffin. I mean, I do think it is kind of a red herring, and it has more of a political message than I think a real message, but it risks a lot of things. And the other thing you mentioned before, Rick, the impact on public health. Councilman Griffin or Council President Griffin has been, a leader around the whole infant mortality struggle in our city. I mean, Black babies die at a rate twice as great as white babies in our community. And we know that one of the reasons for that is that racism sort of permeates our systems, our healthcare system. If we don't tackle that head on, I mean, we've made a lot of progress. Actually, we're at the lowest level we've been in quite some time in this community, in part because of this effort. But if we pull back on that, it has real consequences. It means more babies die, and we have a less healthy community. And that's just unacceptable.
That is. Just a reminder to those who are viewing, you can text questions about this subject to 216-307-5632. Number right there, 216-307-5632. And those questions will be fed to our panel of experts as we continue to discuss this. Merle, let's get back to schools. One part of critical race theory, actually, we can't even agree on what it means, but the theory in proposal in theory would require the State Department of Education to rescind funding to schools that instruct students on certain subjects. Now, it doesn't matter if a school is well off like a Chagrin Falls or a Hudson, or if it's at the lower economic strata like a Youngstown or a Lorraine. I can only imagine that taking money back from a school system for whatever reason would be crippling.
First of all, there is a definition for critical race theory. So let's deal with that first.
Okay.
Critical race theory is a framework that examines how systemic racism exists in the United States because of government policies. That's what it is. It is not taught in K-12. I repeat, it is not taught in K-12. It is taught in colleges, mainly law schools, and it examines how systemic racism exists in this country because of government policies, which means it is intentional. That's what critical race theory is. So when people say, I don't know what it is, that's what it is. Now, the thing that I wanted to also share is that critical race theory came to be in the 1970s when the late Professor Derek Bell found that even though we had the Civil Rights Act, which passed in '64, we had the Voting Rights Act in '65, there was still ridiculous discrimination against Black people. And so the late Professor Derek Bell, along with Kimberly Crenshaw, who has been on many different programs, and she's just brilliant, but they decided that there needs to be an examination of why systemic racism was still so rampant, even though we had those two laws passed. So that's what it is. I first want to talk about that. But what's happening, especially in our schools, is that there's confusion. There is confusion. Some teachers are afraid. Some are going to be defiant. I talked to some teachers who said, I dare them to come and try to change the way I've been teaching for 36 years. Relationships are important. When students walk into a classroom, they expect to be able to listen to their teachers and to engage with their teachers in an honest way. We're talking about teaching the whole child. When you talk about the whole child, that means making sure that child is safe, supported, engaged, challenged, and healthy. A child cannot feel safe in a classroom where they're being lied to every day. And then they also cannot feel safe when they have their teacher's license being threatened if they tell them the truth. So this is really, it's really a horrible, chaotic situation for Ohio. And then we have a General Assembly who is supposed to be focused on improving education in Ohio. You can't approve education when you are taking away the right of teachers to deal with education in an honest way. And just to mention one more thing, when you talk about the law, it is sweeping the country. These are model legislation that comes down from right-wing groups that send it to every state and say, here's what you're going to pass. In Tennessee, they're banning a book called Ruby Bridges Goes to School, simply because they don't like the picture of white people holding signs and saying terrible things. This makes no sense at all. Children need to learn that we are different, but we still should get along. It doesn't make sense for them to encourage students to be against one another instead of coming together. So it's just really, it's horrible what's going on in Ohio right now.
Thank you for your definition. I think what I meant was simply that we can't agree on what it means, not that we don't know what it is. There are a lot of people saying, look, it's not being taught in Ohio's K-12 schools, as you just said, but there are many who say that there is some version of CRT that does influence, even perhaps unintentionally, what's being taught in the schools. Is that a point you see parents as believing?
I think there are parents who, unfortunately, don't like the idea of their children learning about race or sex or anything. In the bill, sex is defined as biological sex. We know that we have LGBTQ community, we have transgender children, we have children who are gay, and unfortunately, there are people who don't like the idea of that, so they don't want it to be talked about. But when you don't talk about these things in school and you don't talk about them at home, then that means they get talked about in the street, and that's when children get the wrong information. That's when bullying can happen, and that's when children can end up being depressed or even committing suicide. So if you're not going to talk about these kinds of things at home, then it's important to have a safe environment in schools for children to be able to talk about things that they may not understand or they may be confused about. There was one teacher that shared with me that her child was learning a lesson about kinder transport, something that I was not familiar with. I looked it up, and it had to do with children being transported from Nazi Germany during that time. And so instead of this parent going to her legislator and saying, you need to write a law to make sure nobody talks about this, instead she went to the principal, they went to the community, and in the community there were 3 Holocaust survivors. And what they decided to do was to have those Holocaust survivors come and talk to the entire school about the Holocaust. That's how you deal with honesty in education. That's how you create healthy partnerships with the community so that children learn the truth about education instead of somebody pretending that it's a bad thing.
Back to Council President Griffin's point that critical is an important part of learning. Blaine, while we're talking about that, you deal with children too, not just in the Cleveland schools, but across the city. What do you hear from kids? Do they talk through their council people, to their council people? Do you hear it from their parents?
Absolutely. I mean, I tell people the fun part about being a council person is you get a chance to represent so many constituencies, and what comes out of the mouth of babes is amazing. And this is why, this is such an asinine bill. These young people are actually smarter than we had. I joke a lot of times, and I tell people when I grew up, we had 3 TV stations plus PBS, and at 12 o'clock in the morning, that flag will wave and everybody had to go to sleep because it wasn't nothing on. Now you have children that have thousands of TV stations. They have unlimited access to internet and social media. They also have, just unlimited amount of access to information. So for these folks to think that these kids and these young folks won't have an opportunity to have these conversations in a structured environment is crazy. These young people are going to find a way to get the information regardless. And I'd rather have them make sure that they have these conversations in a structured setting where they're safe and can have a structured environment, like my good friend and Ward 6 resident, by the way, Merle Johnson just said, that we actually provide these kind of atmospheres to have these things. For too long, we've hid race. We've hid it. We've not wanted to talk about it as adults. And these young people are going through a grand awakening where they basically are saying no more. They understand that our communities have been redlined. They understand that a lot of the blight that we see in our community was from intentional government sanctioned activities. They understand that, what's happening to them. This young generation is probably one of the smartest generations that we've ever had. And to just leave them up to their own devices to try to understand these kind of topics and theories is dangerous, because if they do it in an unstructured way, then that's when you get the extremism. That's when you get the Columbines and all of these other things happen, because then they have an opportunity to be indoctrinated. Mm-hmm. And it's a difference between being educated and indoctrinated. And that's what I think that these folks want to do, is that they want to try to clear the path and try to make the scales uneven so that they can indoctrinate certain people while they marginalize others. It's the epitome of racism that we're talking about right now. And that's why I do enjoy talking with the young people. Yes, the young people do talk to us about these kind of things. And it's just always amazing how intellectual and how intelligent and how insightful these young people are. They get it. That's the reason why. And I got one more surprise for this group that's trying to do this. By the year 2050, the United States of America is going to be a majority minority country. The statistics show that. John Corlett can tell you how the statistics and the trajectory are taking place. So the fact that you don't want to have healthy discussions about racism and trying to help people develop into a more welcoming and equal society is really crazy, because in about another 20 to 25 years, we're going to be forced to have to acknowledge these kind of conversations and forced to have these discussions. White dominance and white male dominance is not going to last now. And I know that a lot of people want to keep on representing it, but it's not going to last forever. Just the statistics and the sociology and the population dynamics don't support it.
Councilman, you said it was a surprise. It's really not a surprise. Just think back 50 years ago, you wouldn't be where you are. I wouldn't be where I am because of the way we had situations back then. He mentioned you, John, and the idea that you also, as we're talking about kids here, deal with nonprofits that deal with children. Do you hear from them and from their parents? Is there a concern out there of the impact beyond just what happens inside a high school classroom?
Oh, I definitely think they're concerned about it. I mean, one of the things in this bill that hasn't been focused on very much is every Ohio town, village, suburb, city, mental health board, public hospital, county, form of government, they all have to either hire a new person or designate an existing staff person to be the kind of what I call the diversity police officer, the person who has to review all the inclusion and diversity programs that they may operate directly, or that the nonprofits that they contract with operate, or the for-profits that they support operate. I mean, that's close to like 4,000. Do we really need 4,000 diversity, equity, and inclusion police in Ohio? I mean, it's such an overreach and so destructive. And I think nonprofits are really worried about, particularly the ones that work with young people, because as Merrill Johnson said, the honest conversations are the best conversations, and where you can talk openly about things, where people feel safe to have those conversations. That's how we make progress. We don't make progress by sweeping it under the rug and hiring 4,000 diversity police, in the state of Ohio.
Thank you. Our fourth panelist has joined us now, Aisha Hardaway, and trust me, I gave you the big flowery introduction earlier. I gave you a couple of minutes here to listen and see where we are. But what I wanted to ask you about is a quote that you gave me a week or so ago. You called 327, or whatever we're going to call it now that it's been slightly changed, irresponsible legislation. I wanted you to expound for the audience what you mean by irresponsible and these lawmakers' plans.
So first of all, Rick, thank you so much for the introduction that I missed. My apologies. I'm in Fort Worth, Texas, in a hotel room. So forgive me, and was just on a panel that went long. So my apologies for being late. I raced to my room as soon as I could. I can't quite remember exactly what it was when I gave you that quote, but what I will say generally about the legislation is that to the extent that it attempts to discredit or misrepresent, let me use that word, misrepresent exactly what's happening in the classrooms across our K through 12 buildings, I think is a huge detriment, number one, to our teachers and to our students. I also think that quite honestly, to the extent that we believe that our students are not, and I heard the councilman's comments just a little bit earlier, that our students are not hungry for and capable of engaging in these what adults find to be uncomfortable conversations, but I think many young people find to be refreshing and thought-provoking, but also answering questions that they have that for whatever reason the adults around them just are not really willing to engage and give the full history or rundown of how we got to be the society that we are right now with all of the realities that we're dealing with. And so I think regardless of the race of many of our children, right, we have students who are hungry for, who are inquisitive, who are smart, and will not settle for a whitewashed understanding of American history or explanation of what's possible in our society. And quite honestly, I think, a lot of focus has been on whether or not we're doing a disservice to Black students because of a lack of equity or full teaching in our buildings. And the reality is that we're doing a disservice to all of our students. I can't say that enough. We're doing a disservice to all of our students and to our future. For those of us who hope to live and grow old in these spaces, right? We're doing a disservice to ourselves as well. So I don't know if that's helpful. And I apologize for not hearing all of the remarks before. So if I repeated something, please, you guys, give me grace today. Thank you.
Not a problem. John, you were shaking your head vigorously as she spoke there.
Yeah, I just think this law is just it's a vast overreach, and I also think it probably contradicts federal laws, federal regulations, court decisions. That that could cost the state actually a lot of money, a lot of federal money and other funding. It could cost philanthropic dollars. After the murder of George Floyd, it kind of awakened again another reawakening in this country to kind of confront these issues and talk about these issues. And everybody released statements and all that went on, but I sense a real pushback now on these things. And knowing our history, it's probably not unexpected. And I see this legislation as part of that pushback. Like, you can't go too far. You can't talk too much. You can't say these things. And I just think that's really negative. And I think it's counterproductive. It'll cost the state money. And we will end up in court most likely if we pass this law. And, I just don't know that that's where we want to invest our time or resources.
Councilman, are your hands completely cuffed here? Were the legislature to enact 327, is there any opt-out for the city? People would ask, does a home rule clause give the city council an opportunity to invoke something different inside Cleveland city limits?
Well, that's the first thing that I'll be honest with you that I'm really, looking into. And I was going to say, Rick, hey, I was going to turn over the microphone to Aisha Hardaway because I know she's the expert of this. I'm just one of the temptations. She's Eddie Ruffin or whatever his name is. But what I was going to David Ruffin, that's it. But what I was going to tell you is that yes, we're going to look at our legal options because I agree. I'm not even sure if this is even legal. I would really hope that somebody will really look into the legality of this. I mean, where do we stop? Do we stop teaching the Holocaust? You asked everybody to look at the Channel 5 interview, and there were some great comments by James Pash from the ADL that talked about how how she tried to defend, what do we stop talking about the Holocaust? Do we stop talking about what's happening in Russia and Ukraine right now? Where does this stop? I mean, do we have a certain small minority that gets to pick and choose what happens? Whatever happened to democracy? I thought we lived in a democracy. This is so fundamentally wrong on so many ways, but yes, we are going to look at our city to see if there's things that we could do legally in order to do it, because we often know that we're outnumbered at the state level through gerrymandering and all of the other things that we're experiencing at the state house. So yeah, we are going to look at home rule. We want people to be able to talk in a safe environment, whether it's an educational environment, a nonprofit environment, a community environment, and not be a victim of, you know, having somebody want to sanction them and take their license and take funding away. We're going to fight this like crazy. I'll be honest with you. I've never seen a fight that I'm more ready to have than this one.
Councilman, you say you wanted to check the legality. That's why we have an attorney here. Aisha Hardaway, 327 would also make finding of the General Assembly that systemic racism does not exist. Is that legally defensible, or do they need to just prove the case and declare it by acclamation? I mean, how does this work?
So obviously I'm not here in the capacity as a lawyer for the city of Cleveland, Councilman Griffin. And
you represent us well, sis. That's why.
And I won't opine as to sort of the likelihood of success for any challenges, but I will say that when you have legislation, right, you're looking for a couple of things, right? Is it arbitrary? Is it capricious? Is it overly broad, or is it vague, right? I'd love to be able to add another category here for inaccurate, just to deal with what Rick just brought up. I don't know how, with all of the data that we have in 2022 and declarations by governments and municipalities, City of Cleveland being one of them, that racism is a public health issue, right, and that systemic and structural racism does exist across our country. It baffles the mind as to how or why the drafters of this legislation came up with it. Someone mentioned the News Channel 5 clip, the story there. And I think it's important for us to understand and recognize, and I'm not being tongue in cheek here, right? To the extent that we have failed our students, our young people in education, this is how you end up with legislation like this, right? To the extent that you have folks who are unaware of sort of not just American history, but the realities of the world in which they live, if they live in a bubble, right, and are not touched by or don't have any touch points with people who are not like them, right? You end up with these very obtuse and overly broad and inaccurate sort of assertions and statements that can be baked, you know, they're hoping into law. I imagine that any challenge, you know, that there will be lots of folks who will want to challenge this, Councilman Griffin, should it become law. And I also imagine that some of them would be the teachers, and think about how we support our teachers who came into the profession wanting very dearly to make a difference in our students' lives. How do we make sure that they know that we have their back, and how do we make sure that they know that that they can continue to do the things that they know, because they're the experts there, right? That they know will make a difference in the lives of their students.
We're just about 5 or 6 minutes away from taking your telephone calls, or rather text from the audience. The telephone number to text that to 216-307-5632. 307-5632. We'll get to those questions very shortly. Council President, you mentioned the fact that you're outnumbered. There are 17 Democrats and no Republicans on the Cleveland City Council. Not that a Democrat couldn't also be a conservative, but conservative politicians do dispute the contention that racism is a pervasive element of American life. Is there such a disconnect with Columbus that you can't see a compromise in which they could stand and understand what Cleveland, what Cincinnati, what Toledo, what Youngstown, the urban areas do and see?
Absolutely. We've seen it several times with a lot of the money grabs. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of see this as a money grab. when you look at the draconian penalties that they want to associate with this. These state legislatures have taken tax dollars that is from an antiquated 1920s law and actually balanced the state budget on the back of cities. They've actually tried to strip away estate taxes and other things that really help balance our books. They're now trying to take 15 to 20 million and kick it back to the states for police pension, which hits our bottom lines because that used to be a state function. The state has a disdain for cities, and they don't like cities. The state legislature is not a friend of cities, and we have to change that trajectory. I'm so glad that the courts keep overturning this gerrymandering process down in the state house, because that's what is really holding us back as a city. The state has not been our friend in a lot of cases. And I want to say this. I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, conservative, or liberal. Everybody I know dislike potholes. They want the police to show up on time and professionally do constitutional policing. Everybody wants a good quality of life, good quality schools. So as Dr. Hardaway or Ms. Hardaway said, when people don't expose themselves to each other and have these kind of discussions on these kind of hard discussions, then that's where you come up with these kind of antiquated and draconian laws that we see now. And I try to expose myself to just as many conservative friends as I do liberal friends, because I always try to keep my compass, open on everybody's different philosophy. And I wish that some of my friends in the State House would do the same thing.
And Rick, I want to talk about student voice before we go to questions. So please, I want to say that.
I was about to go to you anyway, so thank you for that. Because we talked in the very beginning about great fears. What's your greatest fear? That the truth is being twisted?
My greatest fear is that students will become disinterested in school, in their classrooms, if they have to go in there and know they're going to be lied to. The student voice is very important in this fight, and I don't hear about students being involved in it enough. I started a group of students. I asked some colleagues to send me students who they felt were passionate about this issue, and I was able to get 13 students. We had a number of Zoom meetings. They wanted to name themselves, so they named themselves Speak, Students Promoting Equity and Knowledge. And I had them write some letters. They wrote 10 letters to the editor, and I was able to get them into some community newspapers. But I want to share some quotes, because when we talk about how smart the students are and how they really know what's happening, this is what it was a very diverse group. I had students from Westlake, Rocky River, Beechwood, Shaker, and Cleveland. And this is what Avery Douglas from Westlake High School said. It is important for K-12 students and teachers to talk about racism and sexism, both social and systemic constructs that exist today, and create an environment where kids can grow up to be accepting and understanding people. And Kayla Blake, a student from Cleveland, Kayla said, as a Black student in America, it is already hard enough to have my identity recognized and my history acknowledged, especially in the classroom. But these two bills would only make everything worse. That's what Kayla from Cleveland had to say. And just the last one I want to share with you, this was Greg, who is from Rocky River. And he said, CRT is not a subject taught in high school. In fact, it is found primarily in college-level law courses to teach future lawyers and defenders of justice the history of laws and regulations that were created to hinder the rights and freedom of minorities. That's Greg from Rocky River. He knows what CRT is. And it's unfortunate that other folks don't pay attention to our students because they know what's going on. And this is horrible, and this is being done to them.
Thank you so much for bringing those voices into the conversation here tonight. Could you tell me how old those kids are? Are we talking sophomores?
These are high school, 10th grade to 12th grade. Yeah.
10th through 12th grade.
Mm-hmm. And one of them did a City Club panel. Owen Gaynor from Rocky River did a City Club panel. Jacob Rintamaki, for the first time, went and spoke at his Westlake school board meeting, and his mom was amazed because she said that that Jacob had a genetic ailment. He didn't talk until he was 5. And I posted his video on Facebook, his speech at Westlake, And she said when she saw his speech, she cried because she had no idea that he could do that. But students need to be involved. We need to pull them in and encourage them to go on a wonderful website. I don't know if you're going to mention it, Rick, but honestyforohioeducation.info. honestyforohioeducation.info. That's where you can find information about the bills, action steps, and everything else you need to know about it.
A lot of good websites out there. Honesty for Ohio is certainly one of those. Thank you for bringing that in. And I'm going to hit those kids up and try and get them on the Sound of Ideas, right?
Just give me a call.
Okay. Thank you all so much for that portion of the conversation. It is time now where we turn the questioning over to our audience. Several hundred of you out there paying attention right now. We turn to Alicia Ellis to present the community questions. Again, she is the co-founder of the women's empowerment group, Fierce Women on Board. Welcome, Alicia, and may we have the first question, please?
Thank you, Rick, and to all the panelists. We have a lot of great community questions. One so far is, what are the chances that this legislation will become law? And is there repeal options to the legislation if passed?
Well,
Blaine, okay, Merle, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, the law came out in May of 2021. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's still in committee, in the state and local government committee, that it hasn't been passed out of committee is really, I think it's a testament to the advocacy that is being done around the state. And so we have to encourage people to continue to write letters, to make phone calls, to do interviews, to let the legislators know that we will not stand for this kind of legislation in the state of Ohio. So when you say what are the chances, it hasn't passed yet, which is amazing. And so we just have to keep fighting.
Yeah, Blaine Griffin, I was going to ask, you see how the sausage is made in those council meetings, sessions that we don't always go to, don't even always cover. How difficult do you think it is, the fight that's going on behind closed doors?
The scary part about this is that this is a national movement ginned up by a conservative wing of the Republican Party that is relentless in trying to create this divisive issue, one for the midterm elections, two for the gubernatorial election, and then finally for the presidential election. So they won't let this thing die. But one of the other is, so just to let you know that it does have a chance. And yes, we should be very afraid. And I want to make sure that I give Juanita Brent, State Representative Brent, actually put forth a bill to actually declare racism as a public health crisis, and it didn't get this far. It wouldn't even get heard in committee. Just to let you know the inequity in the voices in Columbus. And so, yes, this can happen. And I will tell you that there's a lot of really hateful people out there that are trying to maintain power. And I don't want you just to look at the legislators and the people and the sponsors behind this. I want you to recognize that there's a whole wave of money and a whole wave of support that comes from our ex-president and others on down that have used this as the new polarizing issue in our society.
Mm-hmm.
John, amongst the nonprofits, is there also a groundswell of support on the other side?
No, I haven't run into any nonprofits that support it. And I think Council President Griffin is right that we should pay attention because, a lot of people told me this bill wasn't going anywhere, and it's still kicking there. And, I'd be concerned, particularly post-election. These are the kinds of things that sometimes move in a lame duck session, which will come after November. So I think we need to be vigilant about it and speak out about it and educate people about it. I mean, it has such a broad reach. It affects schools and every other part of government in this state at the local and state level. So we can't stop paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Alicia, next question, please.
Yeah, what are the best way for like an average citizen to oppose this bill? Is there any things that the panelists would like to share on different ways that folks can get involved here to oppose this?
I'll take a quick crack at this, Rick. We need to make sure that we support our state legislature in Columbus a lot more. We kind of send them down there on that 2-hour ride and they're kind of on their own. They need to go down there armed with letters and resolutions from local councils and everybody else that actually says that we strongly oppose that. So when they come to the table, they're not just speaking in a lonely single voice. They're speaking on behalf of all of their constituents in their district. We need to really organize and have a strong wave of support to support all of our state delegation as they go down there, to tell them that we want them to fervently oppose this and give them the support that they need, even if it means taking buses down there, because the other side is going to do it. We need to be just as vigilant.
Your title would give you some clout if you went to talk to the legislature. Would you like to take a bus full of people down there, walk in and say, this is what Cleveland believes?
Absolutely. I'll do so all the time. I mean, I don't have a problem with ever standing out there. When you do these jobs, you actually, you sign up to do that. I didn't sign up to do this because I wanted to be a superstar. I signed up for this because I want to make sure that issues big and small, that I fight for the people that I represent. And that's something that we all need to do. I'm willing to do. I'm here to serve and work closely with our state delegation to do whatever they need me to do and what my constituents want me to do, because I don't just represent Ward 6 anymore. I represent the entire city of Cleveland as council president.
Aisha Hardaway, what else can people do?
So I love the suggestions that have been put out there thus far. I don't know, in addition to what Council President Griffin has suggested, I also think it's really important for us to, in our private conversations, continue to tell the truth about what this really is. Right? The Council President said really quickly, like, this is an agenda that started with, right, during before the last presidential election. We have to be willing to understand and recognize that this is a deliberate attack against not just our students, but really more importantly, an attempt to drum up votes. And if we're able to have a real conversation about that and what CRT is, I love the definition that you got from the student out in Rocky River, right, about what CRT is and what it isn't, and that and helping people to understand that just because we're talking about racism and we're critical of structures that promote racism, that you don't get to just string 3 words together and make them have the same meaning, right? That is not critical race theory. And then getting people to understand why folks would want them to be misled in that way. So in those private conversations, I have people of all different backgrounds call me and say, can you help me to understand what CRT is? And my first response to them is, why don't you tell me what you think it is? Right? So that we can start from that place of talking about why it isn't what you think it is, and then talking more specifically about why it's really what I do, like the legal scholarship that me and many of my colleagues might engage in as we write law review articles or books, but that it doesn't necessarily impact the lives of our students K through 12. But why do people want you to believe that? And why are they hoping that you'll turn out to the polls? Not just in favor of this bill, but more importantly, in favor of the folks who wanted to mislead you to make you think that they're standing with you. I think if I could just add that as a suggestion in our individual conversations, having real dialogue with folks who are confused, who may not understand, and using that opportunity to educate.
And I just want to mention, Rick, the Honesty for Ohio Education.info has phone numbers of every committee member, the state and local government committee, and has their emails. You've got to call. The calls do make, they make a difference. The more calls they get, the more they pay attention. Emails, it's important to contact these committee members. And talk to your own representatives, your own senator, your own representative. Let them know that you will not stand for this kind of bill in Ohio. That's really important to make those direct contacts.
Thank you. Alicia, Ellis.
Yeah, does anyone know if this has the state, the BOE, spoken up against this bill?
Has the State Board of Education, is that what that?
Yes.
Well, we haven't spoken against the bill because that's not really what we do. We don't come together and we have not made a statement about this bill because there's too many people on the State Board of Education who would support this bill. And so that's why those of us who don't believe in it right now are in the minority. And the reason I say that very quickly is because in July of 2020, the State Board of Education passed a resolution to condemn racism and to advance equity and opportunity for Black students, Indigenous students, and students of color. And we were very proud. It's a very strong and raw resolution. We condemned white supremacy. And we encourage school districts to do their own evaluations to make sure that they had equity in their hiring practices and curriculum and so forth. But unfortunately, in 2020, we had an election and we had a new member come on and he put together I forgot to mention that resolution in 2020 passed by 12-5 with one abstention. In 2020, another person was elected. He put together a resolution to rescind this resolution. In October 13th of 2021, this resolution condemning hate and racism was rescinded by a vote of 10-7. And just to mention, our appointed members, 11 members are elected on the board, 8 are appointed by the governor. It was the appointed members that helped us pass the original resolution in 2020. The appointed members were threatened that if they did not vote to rescind the resolution, they would be kicked off the board. The vote was 10-7 to rescind. 2 of the appointed members, including our president at the time, Laura Kohler, did not vote to rescind. They received a call from the governor's office and they were made to resign from the board. So that was a long answer to a short question that we would never, at this point, we would not have the votes to come out against this bill.
Thank you for that. I wanted to bring up the point that we did have board members step away, so thank you for going deeper on that question. Alicia.
Yeah, so how is this law not just fundamentally unconstitutional as a direct violation of the First Amendment?
Aisha Hardaway.
So the First Amendment really only protects individual speech. This is going to be a really, really short constitutional answer, the shortest you'll ever hear. But because it's about teachers, public teachers, and government officials, there is some ability to restrict the speech of government actors. Is it a clear-cut sort of constitutional act by the legislature? Absolutely not. I just would say, when we hear all the time, I have my First Amendment rights, I would say, yeah, you do, unless the government is in fact impeding upon your First Amendment rights. And so there is a question there for sure, but the use of government employees in this space is really the question that will ultimately have to be answered.
Blaine, Griffin, do you feel that pressure as an elected official? But yeah, you're an employee of us.
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. You feel that pressure that, they're an employee of us, and yeah, they should be, being able to have the freedom to, let those teachers do what they believe is best. I mean, answer your question, yes. I don't want to expound upon that any further. But let me say this too, Rick. When you have an audience like we have today, and I want to give credit where credit is due, the United Way hosting this forum is a great opportunity for us to really team up with an organization like the United Way and others to try to, lobby Columbus and actually take busloads of people down to Cleveland as well. So I hope that all of these folks that are big fans of the United Way, commend them for putting on this forum, and we'll join with them to try to advocate against this as well.
Thanks for that. Next question, please.
Are there resources available to go to get the objective facts on this issue?
Honesty for OhioEducation.info.
That's your number one, Merle?
Yep. Yes, indeed.
I was also going to say, you could also go to the Ohio Legislative Services Commission. That's where you can find the bill itself and all the different versions of it. You can see how it's changed over time. As I think Rick mentioned at the beginning, how it keeps getting worse with each new version. You can kind of see that all spelled out. But that's also a really good source of information, so you can see it for yourself, what the bill actually says.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been on so many websites this week, pro and con, in preparation here, and I can't endorse one anyway. I'm walking the line, but there are many sources out there for the person who posed that question. It takes a little digging, but there are some out there that you can tell right away they're on the up and up. So thank you for that. Alicia, what's next?
How can we ensure people with power, like our business community or big Ohio employers, like our hospitals, join the efforts to fight these harmful bills?
John, you've assembled kind of panels of nonprofits. Can you take that?
Sure. I mean, I think the first part actually, I think most of the coverage of this bill initially, until just recently, was all around the K through 12 portion of the bill. I don't think most people realized how expansive the bill was, and that it affects every organization in the state, whether for-profit or nonprofit, that does business with a local government or with state government, receives any kind of funds from that government. And if you're operating in any kind of diversity or inclusion or equity activities, those could end up being reviewed by, I referred to earlier, that those sort of diversity police, as I call them. So I think as more people become aware of it and understand the reach of it, I think more people will get engaged and either work, I don't care if they can pick it or they can work behind the scenes. I don't care how they do that. Just make your voice heard on this and let people know. Because I think the other reason why this bill has not moved so far is they don't have all the votes they need. And so we have to just keep pushing on people on this bill. And I think the other thing that I've learned from doing this for a long time is don't prejudge anybody. Talk to everybody about this.
Yeah.
Explain what it does, the reach of it. I have been surprised over the years by people doing things that I didn't think they could do, and then they step up and do it. So they don't have the votes now. So it is worth communicating with everybody that we know. And I think, the comment that Professor Hardaway made about having those individual conversations with people, our friends, our family, and others about it, I think that's really important to have those sort of one-on-one conversations, because that's how we spread the word. And we'll learn stuff from that. We'll learn implications of this bill that we haven't even thought of yet, because it is so expansive.
Merle Johnson, to the point of the questioner, do the big names matter? If a Battelle, a Honda, a Progressive suddenly had all of its people together, when you're dealing with legislators, do they see that? Do they understand the power of people?
I think they do. They claim to care about the economy in the state. They claim to care about business. But if you look at what's going on now, sometimes it makes me wonder. I just think the more people we have advocating against these bills, the better, especially the business community. We haven't heard enough from the business community. And when you talk about students who are not allowed to talk about race in a classroom, which means that if they're sitting in an advanced placement class and it's mostly white students and they don't see Black students, then it might cause them to feel like Black students are inferior. And if that happens, then when they go to a business, they're going to treat Black people the same way. So it's really important for people to recognize that this kind of legislation can really destroy our future economy and the kinds of businesses and entrepreneurs that we're trying to, I'm going to say, raise, only because I taught for 40 years and I consider them my children.
You should. I'm glad you mentioned advanced placement, because about an hour ago, I teased the idea that kids could lose college scholarships because of this. Some interpretations of the law might prohibit classes that are listed as AP classes. And the College Board, which credits AP classes, laid out principles that says that students have to meet to get these credits. And this law could take some of that away. I can see a whole lot of parents getting worried because their kids can't get that cash they need to go to schools in Ohio, not.
And there's university presidents who are writing letters. We're talking about threatening the accreditation of colleges, not allowed to have required courses in diversity and equity. And there are students who choose colleges for that reason. So some higher ed institutions are concerned about students not being able to choose their particular college because they're not allowed to have these courses. So it really could damage a lot in our state.
We've got about 10 more minutes. Let's go ahead and get some more questions if we could.
Do you think that the parents are the ones who are uncomfortable about speaking regarding race and use their children to impose their own beliefs in the process of opposing history and diversity inclusion training?
Wow, great question. Aisha Hardaway.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't want to paint with broad brushes, right? But I will say that for when I was on the school board, I was keenly aware of conversations that were happening with community members visiting other school board meetings. Fortunately, at the school board at Shaker, we didn't have community members coming into our board meetings condemning what they thought was critical race theory. But during the last round of elections, we know that communities, schools, districts all around us had parents going into board meetings with grave concerns about what was going to happen to their children about, if they were taught what they thought was critical race theory. There was a lot of coverage in the media, the local newspaper here around some of the races and the candidates for those. And so I don't think it's a stretch to say that there are a lot of parents, or at least some parents, I don't want to quantify it. There are some parents who have been very, very vocal and who have made it known, even though we're aware of the fact that it's a misinterpretation of what critical race theory is, but that they've gone to speak out against what they think is critical race theory and demanded that their school districts do something about ensuring that their students are not made to feel bad about being white.
Yeah, and those words are in the bill, that you will not make students feel guilty or ashamed or and that's the whole issue. That's how they're getting support, by saying they're making white children feel uncomfortable. But there's something that I read. I was reading an article called "What White Children Need to Know About Race" by Ali Michael and Eleanor Bartoli. And it said something very interesting. It said the research suggests that for fear of perpetuating racial misunderstandings, being seen as a racist, making children feel badly, or simply not knowing what to say, many white parents tend to believe that there is never a right time to initiate a conversation about race. They talk to their children about race if it becomes negative or if it becomes relative in their life. Otherwise, they tell their children that people are all the same and that they should not see race. While white parents' intention is to convey to their children the belief that race shouldn't matter, the message their children receive is that race, in fact, doesn't matter. And so I think that, again, not painting a brush of all parents, but so often when parents don't address race, it causes children to feel like it's not important. And I think that is what we're seeing in our schools.
It's not just race, Merle Johnson. Let me throw a what if at you. Say that teaching about sexual orientation and gender identity is removed from a curriculum, let's say first or second grade, but they're supposed to talk about families. And there may be a kid in the class that has two moms or two dads. How do you get around that?
Yeah, you don't get around it. But what happens is that child ends up being bullied or made fun of or being ashamed because his family isn't like everybody else's family. There's laws around the state now that are saying that this is it almost made me cry when I heard this. I think it's Florida. They're having laws now where they want teachers to out children. They want teachers to actually inform parents that their children are gay or transgender. You're supposed, the best thing about teaching is developing those trusting relationships with our students. Imagine the environment in a classroom, because if one child feels unsafe, everybody feels unsafe. Imagine the environment when the students know that teacher had to out a child to the parent. Nobody in that classroom is going to ever feel safe again. And this is it's horrible.
Thank you. Alicia, Ellis.
Do you think that parents may mistake or equate inclusion and diversity classes for critical race theory?
That is a great thought, and that's come up in many conversations that I've been hearing of. Council President, what do you think on this?
I think yes. I think that, first of all, let me say this. Yes, definitely. I think they're going to mistake diversity and inclusion for critical race theory. And that's the purpose of this, is to try to start to undermine that that whole movement. This is a counter movement towards things like we're doing in the city of Cleveland to declare racism as a public health crisis, and the movements that's starting to go around town. Let me just state this, Rick. There's a difference between equity and equality. There's a difference between equity and equality. And because the conversation and the conversation is starting to move to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and as a norm and as a practice, that's why somebody is trying to put the counter offensive out there. As I said earlier, there's always total order amongst chaos and confusion. Whenever you've seen somebody trying to gin up these kind of decisions, is somebody in the background trying to make some money and trying to gain more power or trying to influence the electorate. And so, yes, that's the whole purpose of why they're doing this.
Yeah, if I could, Rick, is it okay? So just to put a little bit of a finer point on it, Christopher Rufo. So when I talk about this in other contexts, right, Christopher Rufo, who calls himself an investigative reporter, went on Tucker Carlson, right, in 19, I have the date somewhere in my notes, right, but he's on Fox News, and as he's talking about the need to attack critical race theory, what he's describing is in fact diversity and equity inclusion training, right? And he knows that he's talking about bias, the need to have implicit bias or pushes by governments. He was thinking specifically about the federal government, but pushes by government to do implicit bias training. And his whole agenda has been to root out implicit bias training, but he wanted to call it instead critical race theory. He then followed up this push with a tweet that's now been deleted. But in March of a year ago, so it's 2022. So in March of 2021, right, he tweets, we've effectively taken over their brand of critical race theory and made it this negative thing, that no one will want to touch. So this is, to Councilman President Griffin's point, this is a very deliberate effort that has taken root. It started with one individual, and like a lot of other legislation that we've seen passed across the country, whether it's the quote unquote anti-protest laws, right, the stand your ground laws, or any other number of things, right? It started in one place and it is spread across the country. We know that there are bills like this pending in more than 20 other states, with at least 8 of them passed thus far.
We actually had talked about Fox News before you joined us. It bears repeating, though, 1,300 times in a matter of a couple of months, they've mentioned CRT more than all the other networks everywhere combined. So that is being driven from one particular standpoint. Alicia, we have time for one more question. Make it a goodie.
Oh, wow, the pressure. I think that one goes back to the discussion happening in Florida right now. Could this line of reasoning be used as legal challenge should these bills become law?
Ms. Hardaway.
Which line of reasoning? I'm sorry, Alicia. I didn't
which
understand the question.
So the first part of the question is like the massive student protests in Florida with students yelling, we say gay is evidence that the Don't Say Gay bill is decisive. Could this line of reasoning be used as a legal challenge should these bills become laws in the future?
I mean, I think the short answer is that there will probably be a lot of basis for the challenges. Who will have standing to sue, right? Will it be the students? Will it be the parents of students who feel as if their rights are being violated? Will it be the teachers who feel that they have a professional responsibility to support their students? I think that there could be any number of legal challenges to the bill in Florida.
Aisha Hardaway, Blaine Griffin, Merle Johnson, John Corlett, thank you all for your conversation and your thoughts tonight.
Thank you.
Rick.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes,
Thanks,
indeed. Thank you.
I'm Rick Jackson from IdeaStream Public Media. Augie, back to you.
Thank you, Rick. And we really appreciate you moderating this evening's discussion. I have to say, and I don't say this every time, but I mean it tonight, this is one of the best conversations and panels we've had. And I appreciate all of you being here. Thank you to the Center for Community Solutions for co-sponsoring this important conversation. And thank you to our signature sponsor, Rockwell Automation, as well as our community partners for their support. We also want to thank IdeaStream Public Media, Cleveland City Club, WOVU 95.9 FM, WOIO, WEWS, and WKYC, who have live streamed tonight's conversations. And last, but certainly not least, we want to thank our panelists and audience members for joining us on our mission to encourage engagement and dialogue, as well as advance the understanding of this important topic. Our next panel discussion will be held on May 19th and will focus on the impact of the pandemic on mental health and substance abuse, access to care, and treatment. Our May 19th conversation will bring together a panel of experts to discuss COVID's impact on community mental health, service delivery opportunities and barriers, and long-term programmatic and policy strategies at the local and state level to adequately address the ongoing behavioral needs of members in our community. Please join us by registering through our website at unitedwaycleveland.org. Click on our events link and it will take you to the registration page. Registration, as always, is complimentary and open to all. Thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you, panel. Thank you, Rick. And thank you, audience, for joining us. Have a great evening.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, where we are devoted to conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. It's Wednesday, March 23rd. My name is Will Tarter, co-chair of the City Club of Cleveland Debate Committee, and I'd like to welcome you to today's forum. Last year, Cuyahoga County Executive Armand Budish announced he would not run for re-election, launching a race for who would be just the third person to hold the seat in the new county executive structure. Home to 1.2 million people, Cuyahoga County has a rich history and is home to some of the nation's leading public, private, and nonprofit institutions. The winner of the general election will play a large role in determining its future. Leading up to the 2022 primary election, the City Club of Cleveland will be speaking with all three candidates running for Cuyahoga County Executive. Last week, we heard from Democratic candidate Chris Ronayne, and today we feature Republican candidate Lee Weingarten. Lee Weingarten founded LNE Group in 2002, a transatlantic government advocacy firm. Mr. Weingarten served in various public and private positions, including 2 years as county commissioner in Cuyahoga County beginning in 1995. After leaving his position as county commissioner, Lee held senior executive and sales positions with regional and international technology companies. Mr. Weingarten received his JD from the George Washington University National Law Center in 1991 and a BA in Economics and Management from DePaul University in 1988. And today, he is here to explain his platform and why he deserves your vote. Members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Lee Weingarten.
Well, thank you very much for coming out today on Wednesday. I'm reminded this is my 4th time speaking to you at the City Club, but it's been 25 years since I've done it. I remember November 5th, 1996, like it was yesterday. It was my reelection as Cuyahoga County Commissioner. I was running on a successful term as Commissioner. I'd found a $114 million budget loss and turned it into a $40 million budget surplus without raising taxes. I led the charge to bring the Browns back to Cleveland. Cuyahoga County was prospering, adding people and jobs. We were number 1 in Ohio. The early returns that night were promising, and the race was close. But as the East Side precincts came in, the race slipped away. I lost by 25,000 votes out of more than 500,000 votes cast. I lost narrowly that night, but thought I just might come back. Since then, I've grown a family. My wife of 28 years, Caroline, is here today. As I am running to fix Cuyahoga County, Caroline has started a nut-free bakery because 1 in 10 children in America has a nut allergy or nut sensitivity, and you cannot find reliably nut-free products anywhere in Cuyahoga County, at least not yet. You see, we both jump in feet first when we see problems. So please excuse my plug for her bakery. I'm very proud of my wife and a few pounds heavier as her test taster-in-chief. I founded and have run one of the largest combined federal and state of government affairs firms in Ohio called LNE Group, named for our 3 children, Lizzie,